right about now. Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to HR Notes January lecture series. My name is Maddie and I'm super excited to be joining you here today to take you on a wonderful journey through Literature Units 3 and 4 for QCE. Literature is a subject that I have been passionate about for a long time, even a little bit before I started studying it at school. So I'm super excited to be your guide on this journey for today. Now we have a bit of a longer session, so make sure you find yourself a nice comfy spot, perhaps grab a couple of snacks, a water bottle. You're of course welcome to be taking notes if that's something you'd like to be doing, but these slides will be available to you as a resource that you can download and have on your computer. So feel no need to jot down everything that I have up on the screen. You'll be more than welcome to be referring back to them later on. We have plenty to get through in our session today, and I'm going to walk through in a bit of detail what we're going to be covering. But before we do, I'd like to give you a little bit more of an introduction to HR Notes and the people that are bringing you this presentation today. So if you are new to HR Notes, if you haven't interacted much with us before, I'd like to say a particularly special welcome to you. We're so excited that you're here. Thank you for choosing to join us today. HR Notes is an education company that is really focused on helping students do the very best they can and achieve the academic goals they have set for themselves. And part of our mission to do that is to offer for you guys a whole selection of free resources. So we have study notes, we have articles, we have discussions, we have lectures like this one, videos, even an ATAR calculator, and loads more incredible resources which were made by previous high achieving students. So if you're interested to find out more about ATAR Notes or perhaps check out some of those resources for yourself, then we'd love to see you at atarnotes.com/register. And if you're looking to dig into something a little bit deeper, if you are itching for some more resources, then we'd love for you to check out HR Notes Plus, which is a paid resource database with literally thousands of high quality study resources for a huge range of subjects. We have study guides, we have text guides, we have practice papers, worksheets, flashcards. There is something there for every type of learner, for every stage of learning as well. So if you're interested in checking out HR Notes, then you can go ahead and head to atarnotes.com and you'll be able to register from there. So we would love for you to check those out if that's something you're interested in. All right, I think it's time for us to get into the subject that we're talking about today without much further ado. And before we get into any actual content, as I mentioned before, let's first talk about what today's session is going to look like, what we're going to be walking through together today. So we're going to start off with an introduction to literature, an introduction to me as well, your host for today. Then we're going to have a little look at where you've come from, and it's going to allow us to set our minds up for looking forward into the next sort of year of study and some of the stresses that come with studying a senior subject, any senior subject. Then we're going to walk through each of the different assessment pieces. So we'll start off with our analytical essay, talk about our spoken creative, our written creative, and then finally the analytical essay external exam. And we're going to wrap up today with some key exam and study tips as well at the end. So I'm looking forward to getting through all of that with you. As I mentioned before, plenty to cover. But before we actually get into the content, let me introduce myself a little bit more so you know who's going to be talking to you and talking at you for the next couple of hours. Hello, my name is Maddie, as I mentioned earlier. I graduated from Brisbane Girls Grammar School in 2020, which means that my goodness, it's over 3 years ago now. And I graduated with an ATAR of 97.65. My favourite subjects to study in school were English, literature, and modern history. You'll note that literature is in that top 3. And my love of all things writing and speaking and creative has led into what I am studying currently. So I'm doing a double degree in communications and arts at the University of Queensland, and I'm majoring in international relations and peace and conflict studies. I've been tutoring and giving lectures for high school students for the past 3 years since I graduated high school, and it's become something that I'm really passionate about. School is immensely stressful and difficult and hard, and it can be quite overwhelming and tiring to be trying to achieve your academic goals while also balancing everything else in your life. So I've become quite passionate about being able to share some of the tips and tricks that helped me when I was at school to do well, and to really make the most out of such important years in your life. So that's why I do what I do, and I'm super excited to be continuing to do that with you guys here today. And then finally, if you want to break me down a little bit more into some of my core elements, I really love terrible movies. I love reviewing terrible movies, but I need to have excellent bagels. That's something I do not compromise on. And then in regards to those two photos, this is me on some recent travels overseas. That's me and some friends that I went traveling with outside the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. And then the one of me in the green jumper was just after some paragliding in Switzerland. So I'm also a big fan of travel, and I hope to be doing a bit more of that soon. All right, enough about me. Let's talk about you guys. Now, as you know, this is not a live session. It is only one way, but I'd like you guys to take some time to get your brains moving and grooving and get into the headspace of senior literature and what it might look like for you guys. So we're going to take 5 minutes, pardon me, to do a little bit of a warm-up. Now, I want you to grab a piece of paper or a Word document or the notes on your phone and just note down all of your questions or concerns about senior literature. So for example, what kind of assessments are you worried about? How do you feel about the senior text that you have been prescribed? What do you want to know about the external exam, and any other questions or concerns you might have? Take the time to think quite deeply about this. We do have the luxury of a little bit of time for this activity. So have a go at noting those down. I'll tell you when we have about a minute to go, and then we will head into the main content for today. So take 5 minutes, use this as a little bit of an opportunity to get your mind in the literature headspace, be thinking about what's coming up, what obstacles might be coming up. If you are done writing down your concerns, then perhaps write down some goals that you might have for the subject, or even some things that you're looking forward to as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start the 5-minute timer, and I'll let you know when we have about a minute to go. All right, about a minute left. So write down your last couple of ideas down onto your page. Again, if you feel like you've gotten down all of your concerns, maybe start thinking about what goals you have for senior literature, or some things you're looking forward to, some things you feel like you're going to enjoy about the subject. And we'll get into our regular scheduled content in just a minute. Okay. So you might be wondering why I got you to write down all of those ideas right at the top of our session today. Well, the first and perhaps most obvious reason is because there's a live Q&A chat going on down below. So being able to figure out what questions you might have will definitely be helpful for asking them down below. But it's also just a good idea for you guys to be getting into the headspace of this subject as we head into all of our content, so you feel like you have a better idea of what you know, perhaps what you don't know, and what will be the most useful to you. So let's start off, with our session today by thinking a little bit about where you've come from. As you're heading into a senior year of high school, the pressure can feel like it's building. It's a hectic time, there's lots going on. It can feel a little bit intimidating to take on everything that is the senior year. So I wanted to start off our session today by giving you a bit of an idea of how much you actually have behind you to help you do well in this year. Now, because English in Queensland at least is a compulsory subject, you've actually been developing and growing many of the skills you'll need for literature over the course of 10 plus years of schooling. You've done prep to year 10 worth of English classes. You have done an entire practice year of assessments in the form of year 11, where all of the assessment types that you are going to be asked to complete in year 12, you've already done in year 11. You've read dozens of books, analysed hundreds of poems, given countless speeches, written hundreds of stories, and read, analysed, and written literally millions of words. I think one of the most common concerns that students bring to me when they're heading into senior is feeling as though they're not prepared, like they haven't done enough work, that everyone else around them who does better than them, or they feel like does better than them, has done more work and is therefore more prepared and more likely to be getting good grades. When the simple fact of the matter is that even if you feel like you haven't been doing loads and loads of independent study from school, all of this time that you have been working on your English skills is being about preparing you for this year ahead. So if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed in that sense, then just be remembering how much work you've actually done in the past. But many of you will still be thinking, okay, Maddie, that's wonderful, that's excellent, that's a very romantic notion for you to have, but I don't actually care about any of that. All I care about is what I have to do, what's ahead, what's the next steps that I have to take. And that's all very well and good, and we're going to be talking about what those next steps are. But I think it's important that I spend just a brief moment talking about mindset and having good mental health in your senior year of school. This next year is going to be stressful and tiring and hard. There is no real reason or way to sugarcoat that or try and sort of trick you into thinking that that's not the case. This is going to be a hectic year and perhaps one of the more challenging ones that you have to complete in your life. But it's actually manageable, and one of the best ways to do that while still doing well and achieving the academic goals you have for yourself is about looking after your mental health and looking after your brain. It's going to be really important to prioritize getting some really good thinking in about how to look after yourself, how you're going to nourish your body, how you're going to nourish your mind, how you're going to ensure that there is rest and balance in your life amid all of the other hectic commitments and expectations you have in your senior year. The science says, the psychology says that if you are looking after your mental health, if you are prioritizing looking after your mind, then you're going to do better academically. The numbers will reflect that. in your grades and in your final scores at the end of the year. So we're going to talk about balance and how to look after yourself in more practical ways right at the end of the session when we talk about study tips and tricks. But for now, I want you to be thinking about that and have that as a priority for yourself as you also think about doing well academically. All right, but to actually answer your question, where are you going? What is this next year going to look like for you? Well, this is the roadmap for the next 12 months. You're going to have 4 assessments across units 3 and 4, starting off with your analytical written response, then moving into your imaginative spoken or multimodal, as it is commonly known. Then you have your imaginative written response, and finally your external analytical essay. And something nice about literature, being an English-based subject, is that it is equally weighted across the 4 assessments. So you'll be gaining 25% of your final mark for each. This is unlike maths and science subjects where your final piece is worth 50%. This is just nicely equally weighted across the 4. A brief mention also on resources. Now, because literature is not a black and white subject in the sense that you can't, write a practice paper, then flip to the back and find the exact answer there to mark yourself right or wrong, there isn't generally a set textbook that you have to be learning about literature throughout the year. So there are a few resources that you can give yourself that are going to help you as you complete your independent study throughout the year. The first, another shameless plug, is A-Town Notes Plus. So there are some amazing text guides and subject guides within that database for you to have a look at. Those text guides are particularly useful for the senior texts that you find yourself studying throughout the year. Text guides include example essays that are annotated, they have practice questions, they have quote banks, they have character analysis and theme analysis, plot synopses, and all of those great things. So definitely be checking those out. If you are a visual learner, if you find yourself needing to be able to connect different themes and elements and characters together to make sense of it all, then I encourage you to be thinking about making some mind maps for yourself. Famously, within my cohort at school, I had a series of murder walls on my room wall at home where I was making connecting the dots between different characters and relationships within my senior texts. In English and literature in year 12 for me, I studied 2 Shakespeare texts at the same time. And as a visual learner, it was really important for me to be able to see them together so that I could differentiate between the 2 of them. That was really important. I didn't want to get them mixed up. You also have your QCEE syllabus, which is free to access online. You can go ahead and just type in QCEE Senior Literature Syllabus, and it will also, within that website, have a series of past papers that you can have a look at, including some past essay questions, which can be super helpful to have a look at. The syllabus also gives you an idea of what the standards are for the QCEE in terms of the external exam, alongside some annotated high-marked responses for all 4 different assessment types. So definitely go and check that out if you would like. Something I also encourage you to do is to be compiling and creating some self-directed notes just to keep things really organized. A self-directed set of notes basically just is you keeping track of discussions and conversations you have in class, practice analysis you have in class, different perspectives and ideas that your peers have, that your teacher has. What you basically want to be doing is compiling those all throughout the term, so when you get to the time where you're studying, writing practice exams, writing your assessment, that you have all of that as a set resource ready to go. That can be really helpful for yourself. And then finally, if you want to be looking at some resources a little bit more passively, then I encourage you to seek out some Instagram pages that will allow you to do so. And at A-Town Notes, we have one ourselves. It is A-Town Notes AUS. And that Instagram page has study ideas and tips and tricks for broadly for just general study, but also for subject-specific study as well. So chuck that a follow if you would like, just to have something in your feed every now and then. Okay. So a little brief note on literature and what it means as a subject. So as I mentioned before, literature is a subject that is not made up of absolutes, Anything and everything can be considered right or correct if you have the evidence and argument to back it up. So this means that you can't study for English-based subjects in the same way that you would study for things like biology, physics, or chemistry. If you want to get better at literature, if you want to get stronger at it, then the best way to do that is to be practicing the most basic of English skills, which is reading and writing. So I encourage you to be reading not just the set texts that you have been given in class, but more broadly as well. So be reading books that interest you and try and be reading broadly. So different authors, different genres, different types of texts, poems, novellas, memoirs, all of these wonderful things. Not only is it going to do basic things like help you with your vocabulary, show you how grammar is used correctly, how tone and style is used to certain ends, but it's also going to give you a good idea of how the author manipulates character, time, setting, relationship, how they manipulate the the reader's emotional response. So definitely be reading as much as you can. I've always said this to students, it is the best way to passively improve your English skills. The other more active way to do that is to be practicing writing. So definitely when you're heading into your creative tasks, be using creative writing prompts. You can find thousands of those online and be spending 10 to 15 minutes a day working on those as you prepare for your creative written. And that is going to get your creative juices flowing and improve your creative writing skills quite quickly. So I definitely encourage you to be doing that if you are looking to improve your writing skills. My kind of go-to rule is that the more you actively participate within English, and that includes participating in class, asking questions, engaging in conversation, pushing back on people's ideas, the better you're going to get. So I definitely encourage you to take an active role in literature in your senior year, and you would be surprised at how much that will encourage your literature skills to come to the fore and how your academic numbers are going to respond to that as well. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes. Let's chat our analytical essay, which is IA1 or Internal Assessment 1. So this is a type of assessment that you're probably quite familiar with, but it does have a bit of a twist. It is a little bit more complex in the sense that you're going to be dealing with criticism. So this is your first analytical task of 2 for the year, and it's being used as a platform to critique others' interpretations and responses to the text. So you're dealing with a literary critic, you're talking about how they respond to the text and how that might differ from your own response. The criteria further specifies that this essay is to be focused on key themes related to culture or identity. That's really important. Otherwise, it's quite your basic analytical task. It's 800 to 1,000 words, but so excitingly, you do get a boon, you get a little gift, which is that you're allowed to have 200 words worth of quotations in the exam room. Now, this is not a gift you get in your external exam, so definitely make the most of it. Be thinking really intentionally about what quotations you want to bring in and how you're going to be able to use that quotations broadly and to the best of your ability. All right, we're going to have a little look at some of the key criteria for this first analytical task. Now, the word you're going to be seeing the most in this criteria is the word discerning. And discerning essentially means showing or demonstrating good judgment. So discerning analysis or discerning use of something, discerning selection, just means that you have really thought intentionally about how you are writing this piece. Intentional writing is the thing that sets apart junior high school writing from senior high school writing. The marker wants to understand and see that you have thought very specifically about all of the choices you make as an author. So our first set of criteria, discerning analysis of perspectives and representations of concepts, identities, times and places in a literary text, and of others' interpretations of and or responses to this text. So you need to be thinking really carefully about the cultural context which surrounds the text, understanding the way that it has manipulated the concepts, identities, times, and places, but you also need to be thinking about the way that the critic has viewed these same things, how that differs, and how that relates to the author's intentions for the text. Then you have discerning analysis of the ways cultural assumptions, attitudes, values, and beliefs underpin a literary text and invite audiences to take up positions. So audience positioning, it's something that people forget about a bit too much, but you need to be thinking clearly about who the audience is and how they see the world, what society they live within. The cultural assumptions, attitudes, values, and beliefs are a set of buzzwords that you will see countless times, not only in literature syllabi, but in English as well. So you need to be thinking about how those influence the world that the audience lives in, the world that we live in. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about those later on. And then finally, discerning analysis of the effects of aesthetic features and stylistic devices in a literary text in prompting critical and emotional responses. So again, this is not just alluding to your analysis, being able to pull apart aesthetic features and stylistic devices and thinking critically about the way that the author has used them or why the author has used them, but it's also alluding as well to the importance of audience positioning. How does your analysis affect audience positioning? And it's demonstrating here that your essay is going to need really good synthesis, really good flow of logic. You have to connect your analysis to your audience positioning and see how your audience positioning is influenced by your analysis. All right. Discerning use of patterns and conventions of an analytical essay and the role of essay writer to analyze the literary text. As I mentioned earlier, your marker is really interested in the intentional choices that you're making as an author, so you need to be aware of your voice, tone, and style as an essay writer. You need to be writing in an academic voice, you need to be discerning in the way that you write, and you need to have a really clear argument. That is the most important. You're not just writing for the fun of it, you're not just analyzing the quotes that are the most famous or the ones that you talked about the most in class. Everything needs to be linking back to your thesis, and your thesis needs to remain clear and consistent throughout your whole piece. That is the main role of the essay writer. It's their most important role, and it's one that you can't deviate on. Discerning selection and synthesis of subject matter to support perspectives. Again, that's linked to your thesis. All of the evidence that you choose has to be chosen in order to argue your thesis, in order to further your thesis. Discerning organization and sequencing of subject matter, including the discerning use of cohesive devices to emphasize ideas and connect parts of the analytical text. So we're all about synthesis here, we're all about the logical flow of information. So you're not only having the basic structure, introduction, body, conclusion, but you are clearly stepping through the analysis in a way that makes sense. It's really important that you don't get bogged down in long sentences or flowery vocabulary or things like that. Clarity is always more important than complexity when it comes to this task, because more than anything, the marker needs to understand what your argument is. It doesn't matter if you know lots of long words, lots of impressive words. If the marker gets confused, if they lose sight of what your argument is, then you're not going to get marked well. So clarity is so important as a priority. All right, and finally, discerning language choices for particular purposes. So again, intentionality about the way that you are writing, discerning combination of a range of grammatically accurate and appropriate language structures, including clauses and sentences to achieve particular purposes. So you're not just doing exclusively long sentences, you're not just doing exclusively short sentences, you're using them in combination and things like that. Really intentional about being correct in terms of your grammar and spelling, using excess time at the end of the exam to go back and edit really carefully for those sorts of things. And discerning use of written features, including conventional spelling and punctuation to achieve particular purposes. And that's pretty straightforward. I don't need to spoon feed you that one. All right, so let's talk about this criticism. Let's talk about this thing that alters this from your standard everyday analytical piece. So we're going to focus more on what it means to be including literary criticism in this section of today. So first of all, you have to be able to read analytical criticism, literary criticism rather. It's a bit complicated and difficult, and by its nature, literary criticism is most often tertiary level kind of writing, so it's probably a writing style that you guys are a little bit unfamiliar with. The good news is you generally don't have to read every single word of the piece. Not all of it is going to be relevant to you. So when you're approached with perhaps a stack of writing that can be about that thick, start simply with your introduction and conclusion. Get a good idea of what the author's argument is, get an idea of what they are trying to prove as correct or what they're trying to persuade the reader to understand. And then you can go ahead and read through the topic sentence of each paragraph, get an idea of what points they're going to make in each of their paragraphs, and then you can identify which ones are the most relevant to you and which ones you want to read in more detail. It's really important to annotate because that means when you're going back through the work later on, you can find the most important information easily and you don't have to kind of be trawling through all of this heavy writing multiple times to find the things that you need. In its most simple, just highlight the information that is most important, the quotes that you feel like are going to be useful for writing an essay. Note down the things that you don't understand, and then you can take them to class or take them to your peers or teacher to explain more. And definitely be intentional about marking out where there's connections of ideas, where ideas have been connected together, where characters or themes or relationships have been linked together. You can note down the ideas within the criticism that you agree with and those that you don't, because remember, both can be used in your essay. Ideas that you agree with can bolster your argument, but also those that you don't agree with, because you can go ahead and sort of shoot them down like you might in a persuasive piece. And then finally, the criticism that you're going to be utilizing in your work will be specified prior to the exam rather. Since you do have to include specific quotes from this criticism in your essay. So you're able to take quotes from that on your quote sheet into the exam room with you. It's likely that the criticism will be mentioned in the essay question, which means that you're going to have to mention the criticism in your thesis. Because remember, a good thesis uses explicit language from the question within the thesis itself to prove to the marker that you're answering the question directly. All right, so one of the most difficult elements of this task, the element of this task that I think makes it worthy of being a senior task, is having to hold the critic and the author in equal measure. So it's vital to remember that those are separate roles. They are not one and the same. They're not mutually exclusive. The author is still the power behind the text. You and the critic are in tension over your understanding and analysis of the author's choices. So it's up to you to argue whether you agree, partially agree, or disagree with the critic. Okay. So that is kind of the main part we have for our our first analytical task. We're going to be talking more about what an analytical essay looks like when we talk about our external exam at the end of today's session. But for now, let's talk creative spoken. Now, this is a really interesting task. It's a bit of an oddball because it requires you for a bit of drama skills, a bit of video editing skills. These are things that you might not be too all familiar with, or perhaps not even all too comfortable with. But today I'm going to show you some of the most important information you're going to need to make this process sort of as painless as possible. On the other hand, some of you might jump at this chance. This might be the kind of assessment that you love. It's quite different from what you do at school, which can be exciting as well. So the key skill within this assignment is being able to take an idea from a base text, a poem, a novella, a short story, a novel even, a play, and to shift and change it to fit a new cultural context. So here are our criteria for the imaginative spoken or the creative spoken. You need subtle and complex creation of perspectives and representations of concepts, identities, times, and places in a reimagined text. So when they say subtle, they don't just want you to say, women deserve rights. Yes, they do, but why are you telling me this? Why are you saying it that blatantly, that bluntly? You need to come up with a more creative way of proving that point throughout your piece. The complex creation means that you're not just using one aesthetic feature to prove it, one stylistic device, one character to make this point. You need to be weaving multiple of those together to prove the same point. The second, discerning manipulation of the ways cultural assumptions, attitudes, values, and beliefs underpin texts, both the base text and your own original piece, to invite audiences to reinterpret the base text. there's that word discerning again. Good judgment. Good judgment. Discerning use of aesthetic features and stylistic devices to prompt emotional and critical audience responses. So you are the author. You are the power that is the powers that be when it comes to this text, this original piece. So it's up to you to be using your aesthetic features and stylistic devices. And this is why reading outside of the set things from school, set text from school, can be so useful, because you have a really good idea of the way that authors use their aesthetic features and stylistic devices to prompt emotional responses in readers. All right, discerning use of the patterns and conventions of the chosen genre and the role of the speaker, signer, or designer to engage audiences with a reimagined text and invite them to reinterpret the base text. So be really thinking clearly about the genre that you choose for your original story, and be thinking about who you are as the speaker, signer, or designer, and how you are going to take on the role of author, the powers that be, to create new interpretations of the text. Discerning selection and synthesis of subject matter to support perspectives in a reimagined text. So again, thinking about logic flow, thinking about the shape of a story, how you're manipulating emotion, mood, and tension to create certain responses. And then discerning organization and sequencing of subject matter to achieve particular purposes, including the discerning use of cohesive devices to develop and emphasize ideas and connect parts of the reimagined text. So the word develop is kind of quite important here. It's this idea that your key message to the audience, or the key emotional response you'd like them to have, sort of grows and changes throughout the story. We might have a basic understanding of it at the beginning, but you want to have a much fuller and holistic understanding by the end of it for the audience. And then finally, discerning language choices for particular purposes in a specific context. Pretty straightforward. Discerning combination of a range of grammatically accurate and appropriate language structures to achieve particular purposes, and discerning use of spoken or signed and non-verbal features and complementary if appropriate. That means visual and auditory features as well, to achieve particular purposes. So this could include pronunciation, phrasing and pausing, audibility and clarity, volume, pace, silence, facial expressions, gestures, proximity, stance, movement graphics, still and moving images, design elements, music and sound effects, if appropriate. So there is a lot there, but again, this is the senior task. This is what makes it the most challenging. And this is where your teachers really want you to see you stepping up, thinking outside the box, being creative. So I encourage you to be thinking quite intentionally about all of those different things. When you're writing up a script, make it a sound script. Underline, italicize, bold certain words, leave plenty of gaps to emphasize big pauses, leave yourself little stage notes, be thinking about your facial expressions, all of these sorts of things. That is going to take a sort of mediocre piece and turning into something quite extraordinary, or something that we might consider to be quite high marking. All right. So let's talk about cultural context. We've mentioned it a few times already in the session today. We talked about it in the criteria of the previous assessment task, and it is a massive piece of this as well. So let's take a moment to consider the world we're living in today here in Queensland. So what aspects of our lives influence the way that we act and interact with each other? So there are broad things and there are much more specific things. So you might say a broad thing might be how the country we know today, how Australia came into existence, this idea of being a penal colony, a British colony, some of the pain and anger that comes from colonization and all of those sorts of things, to the sports that we are good at. The Australian women's cricket team recently beat India, and that has had a big impact. The Australian men's cricket team is currently doing quite well against Pakistan in the test series, so that is also an element of that. Cricket is something we are quite good at, just as the way that everyone at the Olympics knows that Australia are the ones to beat in the swimming. To the climate we live in. So it's quite hot at the moment here in Queensland. I'm sure you guys are quite spread across the state, but I'm here in Brisbane. It's definitely quite warm, even though it's been storming for the past couple of days. There's no way that public pools would be $2 to get into this summer. I don't know if you guys know this, $2 to get into a public pool, make use of that, if our average temperature wasn't as high as it was. So if we lived in a place where the average temperature was, 22 degrees, then there's no way that the Queensland government would make public pools $2 to get into. People just wouldn't do that. But because our temperature is nice and high, because public pools are in such demand, because we want people to be getting out and cooling down and having fun in the weather, then we have that cheap price. So what are some specific elements of our culture here in Queensland that influence us? So let's say 2 minutes to have a think about that, maybe jot some of them down. What are the specific elements of our culture here in Queensland? And you can think broadly as well, here in Australia, that influence the things that we do and who we are, the way we see the world, or even more specifically, your own cultural or ethnic background, what your culture is like within your suburb or within your city, and then we can, or within your school, within your class, within your family. What are the things that influence the way that we are? All right, a little less than a minute left. Keep jotting them down. If you'd like, you can pop them down in the Q&A live chat down below so others can see what you're thinking, what some of those elements of culture are. So hopefully that little 2-minute break will give you an idea or a greater sense of the fact that the culture we live in influences pretty much everything about the way that we live our lives. It is intrinsic to who we are. It influences the way that we talk, the words that we use, the people that we know, the shops that we like to go at, the holidays that we take, the public holidays that we have, the sports that we enjoy, the people that we like, the people that we dislike, and so on. So culture is really important aspect of writing a story because you need to be thinking about the way that it influences readers to respond. So what is cultural context? When you're taking this cultural context from your base text, I want you to be thinking broadly. I want you to be thinking about taking a key theme from that base text into your own original piece of work. So it could be family, youth, love, grief, anything like that. The detail and uniqueness of your story, what makes your piece original and new, will come from the way that you choose to transform it. So the first way that you might do this is by teleporting and moving that theme to a new country. So you could move from England to Australia, and that is called a change in geographic context. So although England and Australia do share some cultural ideas, we both love a pub, there are definitely some big differences in the way that we see the world. Even just thinking about weather. Think about what the weather is like in Queensland versus what the weather is like in London. It's very wet and grey over there, and it's almost pretty much perpetually sunny here in Queensland. So that changes the way that people are, the way that they see the world. So geography can make a huge difference. Another way you can do this is time travel, so putting your theme into a new time period. You could move from the 1800s into today to the 2020s, and this is referred to as a change in temporal context. Your new cultural context could even come in the form of changing the gender of your main character. The men experience life quite differently to the way women do, in the same way that a non-binary person experiences the world very differently to men and women. So changing the gender of your main protagonist can make a huge difference in the way that they interact with the theme and how they interact with other key elements of the story. So this is how you might go ahead and change the cultural context of your piece. It is really important that even though you are making quite a drastic change in your story, that you're still maintaining a strong connection to the base text. There needs to be a really clear retention of the key theme across the two pieces. And if you would like, you can also aim to include a few Easter eggs in your piece in the same way that Taylor Swift does in her music videos. Thank you very much. So that your teacher can identify those and see that you are still retaining a nice connection between the two. It's also demonstrating that you have a really solid understanding and knowledge of the base text as well, which is always a plus. This could be a certain setting that you use in your own piece, a nickname that the main character has, a motif that the author uses extensively in the original work. And you're encouraged to use those, I'm going to encourage you rather, to use those creatively, give them your own spin, think outside of the box. Now, you're probably going to hear me say thinking outside the box a lot in terms of the creative pieces. You might be thinking, okay, Maddie, that's great, that's fun to say, but how do I think outside the box? Again, this is where your creative writing prompts come in. If you would like a nice, easy way to be studying for literature when it comes to your creative work, to be using creative prompts. So you can go ahead and search for them online. There are so many out there. Spend 10 to 15 minutes working on one, and you'll begin to see creative ideas and inspiration everywhere, all around you. So definitely be working on that. All right. So for most students, this task is going to look like a monologue. It's going to look like a filmed monologue that might have extra auditory and visual effects within it. So you have a limited amount of time within this monologue. Often these tasks are somewhere between 6 to 9 minutes, and that isn't very long to get a really clear message to your audience while including all of the elements of a creative story. So I want you guys to be thinking about using the classic shape of creative storytelling. It's a pretty easy way to ensure that you're including all of the emotional tension elements that you need to be including in a story. And I think there needs to be an emphasis on beginning your conflict nice and early. It just means you have as much time as possible to engage that conflict, to develop that conflict, and to be using it to create your final message. It's important to remember that by their very nature, monologues are one-way conversations, so you'll need to be creative about what's prompted your main character to share this monologue and who the audience is, who they're actually talking to. They're not just talking to the air. Who are they discussing? So as you can see, this is the shape of a classic story. It begins with your exposition, then your conflict is introduced very, very early. You have your rising tension up to the emotional climax of the story. You have a falling tension and then your resolution at the end. Now, you'll note instead of Disney fairy tale beautiful romantic ending, I have written resolution. Resolution just means that there is some sort of emotional conclusion to the story. Cliffhangers, they're old, they're out of vogue, they're very 90s, no one likes them anymore. They're pretty exclusively overdone. Unless you have an incredible cliffhanger that has been approved by your teacher, I would encourage you to think instead about how you're going to resolve the story. Now, resolutions don't have to be happy. That's not the meaning or the definition of the word resolution. They just have to have a definitive conclusion to them. Important to note. All right, so when it comes to the actual multimodal aspects of the story, less is generally more. So some teachers will have rules about how often your face has to appear on screen, generally more often than not. I've had very specific criteria from teachers, both from students and from myself in the past. I had a student whose teacher said that their face has to be on screen 75% of the time. So there are all sorts out there, all sorts of criteria for that. While others simply will say that you need to include a number of sound effects here and there in order to elevate the emotional response to your story. It's important that whatever you add into your story in post-production aids the overall tone and mood of the piece in the sense that it works for you and not against you. You're not just putting in those elements for the sake of it because you've been told to. Again, we're in senior, intentional. We need to be making discerning choices in order to elevate your piece. This means that generally an increase in volume of sound effects, for example, would indicate a rise in tension and so on. A really important note here, and I can say this from experience as someone who not only did several of these tasks in school, but is also studying communications at university, do not leave editing to the night before. It is a process that always takes longer than expected, and you don't want to leave anything to chance in terms of like exporting and importing and all of those sorts of things. Sometimes your computer can just fritz when it comes to that sort of thing, so you want to be really careful about how much, giving yourself plenty of time to do that. And definitely have multiple copies of things, have backups, and all of those sorts of things in order to ensure that nothing sort of goes wrong at the last minute. All right. And then when it comes to the actual acting, the performing of the piece, it's important to be really intentional in the same way that you're intentional when you're putting together your persuasive speeches in English. So you're thinking about tone, pause, emphasis, hand gestures, postures, and the like. Now, this is something that comes a little bit more naturally to some than it does for others. As you can see, I'm not sure if you can see in the camera, but I quite naturally talk with my hands. I'm already doing lots of gestures as I'm discussing things, but that's not the case for everyone. So I encourage you to be practicing in front of a mirror so you can identify the way that your face moves, the gestures that you have, your expressions, change in tone and pace and pause and all of those sorts of things to make sure that you are putting on basically a good performance. A memorized script when it comes to this is always best because it makes you feel genuine and believable. You're not always looking down in the camera and then missing that all-important eye contact throughout the piece. Now, you don't need to be a master of the dramatic arts. Being genuine, being believable is all that matters in this. And it's really, really important to avoid monotone when you are doing this piece. You're not just blurting out 6 to 8 minutes of content without taking a breath. That is boring, that is not engaging, that is not giving your story and your script a chance to shine. So be thinking, as again, like you do in persuasive, about change in tone, going up at certain parts, going down at certain parts, pause, and other things like that. So definitely be practicing for this. Don't just turn the camera on and expect it to be perfect first try. It might take a little bit of time to do so. All right, so we're about to move into our creative written, but I understand that I have been talking at you guys for a while. So we're going to take a break and give you guys the opportunity to be asking some questions down in the live Q&A chat. We're going to take about 10 minutes. I want you guys to also be moving, stretching, resettling yourself for the second half of our session today. Now, I'm just going to check. Yes, wonderful. So yes, take this opportunity to be asking questions down below. Be moving around, refilling your water bottle, getting a new set of snacks, refreshing your notes, having a quick scroll through TikTok, and then we can get back into the second half of our session for our last 2 pieces of assessment and our study tips and tricks for the end. All right, wonderful. I will see you guys in just a moment. under 5 minutes to go. Keep asking those questions down in the live Q&A chat. All right, we are going to go straight from our little break into a warm-up. So it's time to get those brains re-engaged back into the content that we are going to be discussing. So let's try one of the famous creative writing prompts that I have been plugging for this entire time. This one is one of my absolute favorites, and it's definitely one that's gotten some amazing responses from students. So you're going to imagine that you're a piece of art hanging on the gallery wall. You're up on the wall, your piece of art. What do you see from your perspective? Who is in the gallery, and what are their reactions to seeing you? I want you to try and give the audience a sense of what type of art you are, of what you depict, using only the reaction of the gallery visitors. So you're not going to say explicitly what you look like, who you are, if you're even a person. I want you to try and allude to that based entirely on the visitors' responses to you. So we're going to take 5 minutes. This is a little bit shorter than what you would generally spend on this, but it's a bit of a challenge, and I'm excited to see what you think. So go ahead, grab a pen, grab some paper, and have a go at this response. We'll get those brains moving, those creative juices flowing, and then we'll get back into the main content. About a minute and a half left. Keep writing, keep writing. Don't think about the time limit. Just get as much down on the page as you can. Oh, there's the awful sound of the timer going off. But there you go. There is your first creative written response, your creative prompt response, I guess. I want you to take a minute to just have a little check-in with yourself and consider how you felt while you were writing that. Did that come very easily? Did that feel very natural? Were the ideas flowing? Or was it a little bit trickier than you might have expected, perhaps? Perhaps you weren't quite sure what direction you wanted to go in, the sentences weren't flowing nicely, all of these sorts of things. Understanding your response to that will help you understand how much these creative responses are going to give you. If you are feeling really confident with writing creatively, then this is something you might want to be doing for fun, to be keeping those muscles working, to be maintaining those creative skills. But if you felt like you struggled a little bit, then doing plenty of these could be an excellent way for you to prepare as you head into these creative tasks and to help you feel a little bit more as if you were prepared and on top of what the creative responses are going to ask of you. So I definitely encourage you guys to be doing more of these, to be continuing to grow and develop your creative writing skills. Just like any other thing, any other habit, any other talent, it is something that can be grown and developed across time. So definitely be continuing to work on those. All right, so your creative written response, just like your multimodal, this piece is open-ended, and it's based around making an original literary text, being really intentional about choices you're making in order to create certain emotional responses within an audience. You're also going to be shaping perspectives and representations in your piece as well. So, because you're in senior, your teachers, as I've mentioned plenty of times, are expecting you to be intentional about the choices that you are making, from the aesthetic features, the names of your characters, the settings that you put them in, the specific cultural context they're in, and so on and so forth. Because in the spirit of setting you up for the real world, that is what real authors do. All right, but unlike your multimodal piece, you have almost complete freedom in what it is you are writing. You don't need to take a key theme or idea, a character, a setting, or anything from any other text and transform it into original work, nor do you have any limitations on what time period or what geography or anything like that your story has to take place in. You don't even have to write it in a certain genre or form of story. You could write a poem, a screenplay, anything like that. So it is so open-ended and allows you to really be creative and to be writing something that you would like to read, that you are passionate about. So the key language that the syllabus uses when it comes to putting this piece together is purposeful. You need to be drawing on all of the knowledge that you have of stylistic devices and aesthetic features from all the other assessment pieces that you have done throughout your schooling, both in English and literature. This includes point of view, narrative voice, non-linear narrative, plot structure, symbolism, motifs, setting, dialogue, vocalization, mood. You aren't just throwing these in there and hoping for the best. You are using them to develop and deliver a particular message for your audience. Now, the open-ended nature of this task can make it feel a little bit intimidating to some people who aren't as inclined towards creative writing, but there are definitely some ways that you can steer yourself in a more definitive direction. So, this message that you are trying to deliver to your audience is built around a desire as the author to engage, explore, critique, question, subvert, entertain. It's all about purpose and wanting to achieve something specific in particular. You should have your key message or purpose in a single sentence form at the top of your Word document as you are writing. You want to condense this message down into something really succinct, really clear. Now that sentence isn't going to be staying in your story. Remember, we want to be subtle, we want to be complex in the way that we are developing and delivering this message, but it can be really helpful as you're writing to have it in that really clear form. It just ensures that you're on track, you're not deviating from it, you're not rabbit holing or trying to include too many elements, because we want to remain clear with what that message is. It's important to check it throughout the writing process, but also in particular in the editing process. And it's going to allow you to determine if you've been successful in revealing this message over time. So let's look at the specific criteria that you're going to be asked to be achieving in this particular task. So first up, subtle and complex creation of perspectives and representations, of concepts, identities, times, and places in an imaginative text. So just like your other creative piece, we're not just blurting out our message in this really blunt, straightforward, to the point way. We're being more subtle about it. We're using multiple different elements of storytelling and weaving them together towards a singular purpose. We're using discerning manipulation of the ways cultural assumptions, attitudes, values, and beliefs underpin texts and invite audiences to take up positions. Now, not just because you haven't been given a specific particular temporal or geographic context doesn't mean that the context you choose doesn't matter. In fact, you should be thinking about the cultural assumptions, attitudes, values, and beliefs, the cultural implications of your geography and temporal ideas when you are writing. So if you're talking about something in particular, a certain struggle that a people or person group might have, then you need to be thinking about which geography and which time period is going to improve that situation for them or make it more difficult for them, how that might raise the stakes or improve emotional response, those sorts of things. You also need to have discerning use of aesthetic features and stylistic devices to prompt emotional and critical audience responses. So you want people to be thinking and feeling. You're not just influencing emotion with your aesthetic features and stylistic devices, but also the way that people are seeing things. You want them to come to a new understanding. You want to teach them something by the end of the piece as well. You need to have discerning use of the patterns and conventions of an imaginative text and the role as the writer to achieve particular purposes and relationships with audience. So when we talk about particular patterns, we're talking about the structure of a good story, the way that things grow and develop over time, the way mood develops, the way tension develops, the way characters develop and change and grow, the way relationships change and grow, and how the audience might respond to all of those things. You're also thinking about a discerning selection and synthesis of subject matter to support perspectives, and a discerning organization and sequencing of that subject matter, so things flowing logically to achieve particular purposes, including discerning use of cohesive devices to emphasize certain ideas and connect parts of the imaginative text. So the emotional climax of the story, the high point, the most tense part of the story, needs to connect with the original conflict as well as the resolution, so it feels like it flows neatly all together. You also need to have discerning language choices for particular purposes, as well as discerning combination of a range of grammatically accurate and appropriate language structures to achieve particular purposes, including your clauses and sentences. So in creative writing, you can be a little bit more free with how you approach creating your language structures and things like that. You're not confined to that really formal academic tone that you have for most analytical tasks. So I definitely encourage you to be using different types of vocabulary, lengthening and shortening your sentences in different ways, using contractions, all of those sorts of things, using internal dialogue, external dialogue, all of these things. And a discerning use of written features, including conventional spelling and punctuation, to achieve particular purposes. As always, it's really important that you're being intentional with your editing, you're taking the time and leaving yourself enough time as you are writing these pieces to be able to edit well. Now, the best way to do this is to be able to have enough time in this process to finish writing and put your piece away for perhaps a night. So finish it, sleep through, and then the next day you can go through and edit. If you have the luxury of doing so, read it out loud. Make sure that things are flowing nicely. Reading out loud basically just provokes your brain to be understanding and absorbing the information in a new, different way, which means that you're more likely to pick up on mistakes that you might jump over or miss entirely when you're reading in your head and reviewing through like that. You can also peer review, so give it to someone else to have a read through and see if it makes sense. Perhaps see what their emotional response or critical response is at the end of the text, see if that aligns with your intention for that as well. All right. Let's talk really briefly about mind maps. It's something I mentioned all the way back at the start of the session, and this is most helpful for people who are a bit more of a visual learner, but I think it can offer something to everyone. This is a mind map that I made myself way back a million years ago in 2019, and this was for a very similar task. So I wrote about Little Women, which is the book by Louisa May Alcott, and I was thinking about how I might change and transform this into a new piece. So this was not this particular task in the sense that I wasn't writing a wholly unique piece. I was taking elements from the base text. But you can see I have this base text here. I have two of the main characters. I have Laurie and I have Jo, and I am taking this context into a new geographical and temporal context. So I did both. So I had Jo and I'm thinking about how she might change into this new character to create a new response. I was thinking she might be a woman in sport or a more masculine job. I decided that she was going to play rugby in her little town. I was going to say that all of her friends were boys, that she cuts her hair to rebel against her family rather than cutting her hair to save her family, as she did in the original text. And I also decided that Jo was going to become the youngest. She was going to be a little bit more separated from her sisters. She was going to be a little bit more of the black sheep of the family in a way that was not as respected by her family as it was in the book. I also decided that Laurie was going to be best friends with Jo, and I wanted to change the context and the influence of his character a little bit more by making him Aboriginal, a First Nations character, and I had to be really careful and intentional about the way that I wrote that. I had to do a fair bit of research to ensure that I was doing him justice in that sense, but that is definitely something that you can do. Be intentional about it, but do your research and be willing and opening to accept criticism and be changing in that sort of sense. But with the implications of that, I decided that he was not going to be accepted by Jo's family, that he might be adopted by a white man, and that might change his situation, his context as well, and perhaps even has a white name, Teddy. And then I was going to just thinking more broadly about some of the themes that I was going to incorporate here, considering women's role in society, considering what women want to do themselves rather than what is expected of them. So I did mostly character work on this side, and then I wanted to talk about some of the key things that I was going to retain from the original story and how that might look in my new context. So small town and big family, how those two were going to play together. Everyone knows everyone. They don't want anything to... Meg, Amy, and Beth are bakers or farmer wife types, so more typical classic small town types, and they don't want anything to do with Jo because she is this sort of blatant rebel. That she might have super conservative parents, and this idea that everyone gossips about Jo in this small town. And then this idea of struggle, which was a key theme from the original text, and how was I going to develop that? So this idea that Jo has to fight for acceptance. Not only is she in a man's game, but her parents don't approve, her own, loved ones, her own family don't approve, and this idea that everything she does is some sort of rebellion. So you can see that having this here acts as a bit of a plan for my story, but it allows all of the ideas I had to be out in a clean, clear way in front of me. It allowed me to sort through them, decide which ones I liked, decide which ones I didn't like, and I would not use for this particular story. So it can be really helpful in creating a plan going into your piece, particularly if you're writing something that is wholly original and unique. Perhaps you have lots of ideas, and it can be a great way to actually get the ideas flowing. If you see them in front of you, you can start to see connections that you might not be able to identify otherwise, and things sort of kind of come together quite quickly. So there are plenty of free websites online that you can use to create them, but of course you can just draw up your own on a piece of paper or on something like an iPad as well. So I definitely encourage you to have a go at some mind maps. They can be really helpful. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about writing good characters, because I think in creative pieces, students can get caught up in this idea of thinking a lot about key themes, key aesthetic features, because these are the things that are talked about a lot in the criteria. But the simple fact of the matter is that good characters are absolutely vital to a good story, because your main character is the vessel that carries your message throughout the whole story. If the audience doesn't feel like they can connect or relate to the main character in any way, they're not actually going to engage with any of the key themes or aesthetic features you've so lovingly sort of pulled together. So what makes a good character? What makes a character believable, genuine, relatable, something that the audience can connect to? The very best characters are believable, and the way that humans are complex. They're complicated. They feel and think more than one thing. They actually exist within a whole spectrum of emotion, and they're most often feeling multiple things at the same time. They also have complicated pasts. They come from a whole range of diverse different backgrounds, and humans are wholly unique as well. So this often means that characters within short stories in particular often appear simple, but then through the course of the story, they become more complex and more unique as we learn more about them. The way that a character is, their personality, their character, comes through not only in the way that they act, but also in the way that they speak, the way that they address certain people, the words that they choose to say, the structure of their sentences. All of these things can tell you about a character. And most importantly, characters aren't bogged down by physical description. Because you're writing what is essentially a short story, you don't have the luxury to be spending paragraphs upon paragraphs talking about the exact hue of a character's eyes, or the tone of their skin, or the way that their hair falls. It's quite typical, because that's something you might be taught to do when you're younger, perhaps in primary school, to talk about the way that a character looks. But it's not necessarily important in your story unless it really is to the point that you're trying to make. But most of the time, people don't care. They can come up with what they believe a character looks like in their own mind. Instead, we want to learn more about them, the depth of that character. So to write your own good characters, you need to answer 3 simple questions when you're developing them in your mind. The first one is, what do they want more than anything in the entire world? This is the motivating force behind the story. This is what drives the plot forward. What is it that they want? What is it that they need? Sorry, my blinds just blew a little bit. I got a little scared. I wasn't expecting that. Number 2, what are they willing to do to get what they want? What are they willing to do? Perhaps they want a Vegemite sandwich. That's all that they want in the world. You think, okay, well, if that is really truly all that this character wants in the world, that's, pretty simple kind of person, not too worried about the things. But then you can learn a bit more depth about this character by answering the second question. What are they willing to do to get what they want? They're willing to kill someone. They're actually willing to murder someone to get a Vegemite sandwich. And then you think, oh, that's not what I expected them to be like. That's a bit scary. And then 3, how do they plan on getting it? You learn more about them again. So you can see there's levels of depth and understanding that you can develop about a character the more you answer these questions. So before you start writing, I encourage you to be answering these 3 questions about your main character. So this is the plot itself. This is this is the motivation. This is what drives the story. This is what drives characterization. So these are really important questions. Definitely be asking yourselves these as you are developing your characters. All right, let's talk a little bit about narrative structure. So if you're thinking about how you might change your story up, how you might make it feel a little bit fresh and unique, then these are some different things you might be considering. So the most typical story, the one that we're all most familiar with, is this idea of linear or chronological stories. So this is stories where events occur in the order that they happened. They move forward pretty seamlessly. Then we have non-linear or fractured stories in the sense where time is disjointed within them. There are flash forwards, there are flashbacks. Events aren't occurring in the order that they happened. And then we have circular stories, so the story ends where it begins. This could be literal in the fact that the character starts in one specific place and ends the story in that specific place, or it could be more abstract in the sense that an idea is brought up at the beginning or the end, those sorts of things. Then we have parallel stories where multiple storylines are occurring at the same time, or frame stories where a story is occurring within a story. One of the most famous examples of this is the Shakespearean play Hamlet, where there is a play that goes on within the play. So the Denmark court puts on a play. Hamlet himself puts on a play within the play itself. It's sort of inception sort of moment. I will note that with your parallel and frame stories, these can be a little bit tricky to fit into the short story context because you just don't have loads of words. I would say that the parallel stories are the most complicated to do in short story form, so be really thinking carefully about if you want to do that, but frame can be manageable if you are clever about it. And then I won't spend too much time talking about structure since we talked about this earlier in our creative spoken response, but definitely be using this structure as you're going ahead and planning your work. I actually like to plan the story using this explicit shape when I'm doing it, and I just write my notes around each of the different elements of the story here. So starting with your exposition, conflict, rising tension, climax, falling tension, and resolution. Be specifically thinking about your climax, the emotional high point of the story, and also your resolution, because your resolution is where your message for the audience needs to be the clearest. So really important to be thinking about that. All right, let's move on to our wonderful analytical exam. This is the final piece of the puzzle. This is the thing that you guys might be wanting to know the most about, the thing that is causing the most anxiety in many of you. So we're going to chat about what this is going to look like and be talking in a little bit more detail about the analytical essay itself, its structure. But of course, you guys guessed it, a little bit of a warm-up. So let's take some time now to write down as many aesthetic features as you can think of. Now, some of you might be feeling a little bit confident about this. You're like, okay, I've been doing analysis work for the past, 10, 11 years of my life. I know some aesthetic features. Well, let's see, how many can you get down? If you like, you can pop them down into the Q&A chat. See if you can go quickly. See how many unique ones you can think of. I'm sure all of you can think of metaphor. But what else? What else is there? can also take this opportunity to have a little munch and crunch, have a little sip of water. Make sure you're staying hydrated. All right, 30 seconds. How many more can you get down? If you haven't been sharing them, maybe count up your list and share the number in the Q&A chat, how many you got down. Would be definitely interesting to see. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's talk the elements of a good analytical essay. So in 2019, again, a million years ago, the QCEE, the Queensland Curriculum and Assessment Authority, conducted a bunch of trial exams to basically see if the ATAR system was viable and to see how students responded to taking external exams. In their English pursuits, when they were doing them for the English subject, their key findings for good essays were as follows. Number one, and most importantly, it's this, daylight and everything else, students need a clear and consistent thesis to do the best that they can. It's as simple as that. The thesis is the golden element of the essay. If a student does not have a thesis, if it's not a good thesis, if it's not adhered to, then they're not going to do well. You can write all the beautiful analysis in the world, you can have excellent audience positioning, but if you're not constantly referring back to your thesis, if you're not linking your evidence and analysis back to your thesis, then you're not going to do well. So thesis is vital. Number two, students need to demonstrate a deep understanding of the whole text. So we're not just talking about one particular scene, one particular chapter, one particular plot element. You need to demonstrate that you have a solid understanding of the play or the novel or the novella in its entirety. And then finally, students need to be constantly referring to audience positioning, drawing on the specific cultural attitudes, values, and beliefs of that audience. So it could be both the traditional audience, so the audience that the text was originally written for, as well as contemporary audiences, us here today in the 21st century. So audience positioning is something that can be a little bit overlooked. People are talking a lot about their analysis and then forget to be linking things to the audience positioning. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that audience positioning a little bit later on. So those are the three elements that the QCEE are really pushing. And this is so important to be aware of this because they're the people that are going to be marking your external exam. So we're going to go through three key and very common mistakes that students make when it comes to writing their analytical essays. Number one is synthesis. So it is very rarely a student's ideas that end up losing them marks in an essay, but rather tying themselves up in knots with complicated sentences and not letting their ideas flow together. This is why planning time in an essay-based exam is so important, having all of your ideas down in their entirety on a planning page before you start writing. Not having your ideas down means that people typically jump around, move from idea to idea, and then things don't flow. Audience positioning is sometimes chucked in as a last minute thought and it doesn't really connect in the way that you would like it to. So having that planning really set and clear before you start writing is really important. Number two is assuming. So students typically think that, oh, everyone's made that logical jump, or yes, everyone knows that this is what this thing means, when in reality, some people are not going to make those same connections that you are. And students then fail to sort of state what they might consider to be the obvious. You need to assume when you are writing this piece that you are the smartest person in the room. You know this text better than everyone, which means you have to be teaching people as you go. You need to be stepping people through your logic and showing them where the connections are that you've made. Teachers and markers are going to love this. They love to see that you have connected all of the dots really explicitly. You might remember when I mentioned all the way back at the top of our session talking about cohesion and connections, that it's really important to be, just being really explicit with the connections, making sure that things are clearly going together logically. Logic is most important there. Then finally, spelling and grammar. It is just typical that exam conditions are going to bring out the very worst in your spelling and grammar. This is a sad fact of life. I have definitely suffered from it myself, but you don't want these things to be the things that are marking you down. So it's really important that you give yourself enough time at the end of the exam to be going back carefully, going through your work and marking your mistakes, fixing your mistakes, clearing your mistakes. Now, this could be as explicit as having your pen and running it along the sentence like this, checking every word, checking every full stop, comma, quotation mark, all of these sorts of things when you are writing. All right. So these are the most important elements. These are the most important ingredients to a good analytical essay. The thesis we talked about earlier, which is also known as your position or your argument, and it acts as the answer to the given question. So it's really important in your thesis that you're using the explicit language from the question in your thesis. It's just a very clear and simple way of indicating to the marker that you're answering the question directly. Then you have your evidence, which of course is picked in order to argue your thesis. This might come in the form of key quotes, structural devices, or aesthetic features. Now, in this task, you're going to be asked to memorize this evidence. You don't get that quote page that you did for your first analytical task of the year. So definitely be thinking about memorizing your evidence sooner rather than later. If you're trying to be memorizing your evidence in sort of the week before the external, where there are lots of other things going on, including other external exams, you're going to be in a rush, you're going to be in a panic. So the earlier you can start memorizing your evidence, the better. Then you have your analysis. This is about digging below the surface, peeling back the layers, unpacking the evidence in order to aid proving your thesis. And then we have our audience positioning, of course, and this talks about how all those other elements that you've discussed prompt the audience to think, feel, or react. So those are your important elements of an analytical essay. So when you're writing the meat of your essay, the body paragraphs of your essay, each of those elements from the slide before are plugged into a reoccurring flow or a reoccurring formula. So we start off with what, which is the evidence. So you plug your evidence in there. Now your evidence needs to be contextualized within the context of the plot of the story. So you're not using page numbers or act numbers or scene numbers or anything like that. You contextualize it using the plot. So prior to King Hamlet or old Hamlet's ghost appearing, Hamlet laments, insert evidence. Then, so what? This is your analysis. What does this evidence mean? So how does this evidence prompt audiences to think, feel, or react? And it's important that how does this evidence, with the analysis that I've just talked about, prompt the audience to think, feel, and react? So now, how does this link back to my thesis? And it's so important to be linking back to your thesis. Now, you use this formula every time you introduce a new piece of evidence. So within a body paragraph, you could be using this formula 2 to 3 times. Now, it's such a useful thing to be doing because it allows you to be using that synthesis. You see those arrows that are linking everything nicely together. So definitely be using these. And it can also be really helpful during your planning time when you're pulling all of your ideas together. Now, in your planning time, you should typically have a thesis, all of your evidence, your topic sentences, and even some ideas of your audience positioning as well. We'll talk a little bit more about planning time a bit later. All right, so this is an example of a analytical essay paragraph, body paragraph. This is the question, and this is the thesis that the author of this has used. So it says, disguise is used by Shakespeare to comment on the manipulation of truth in The Winter's Tale. To what extent do you agree? And the thesis that has been prompted by this question is, as such, Shakespeare manipulates the recurring symbolism of disguise to offer comment on truth as only ever temporarily hidden. So you can see how you've got Shakespeare clearly used across both, you've got manipulation across both, you've got truth across both, and you can see how that thesis is really explicitly answering the question. Now, I don't know if we're going to have time to go through this in detail, but we can probably show how I will talk about how this formula is used here. So you can see, first up, we have the contextualization of the evidence. To reassure himself of the legitimacy of his son, King Leonidas searches for his own likeness in the face of his young son, Mamillius. Then we have our evidence, our what. What has smutched thy nose? And smutched basically just means dirties. What has dirtied your nose? They say it is a copy out of mine. So what? What does this mean? What's the analysis here? Shakespeare's use of Mamillius and Leonidas' shared nose is twofold. Firstly, it demonstrates the two are truly related, as traditional audiences would understand that physical likeness was the only indication two people related at the same time of the play's writing. So we've got analysis mixed in with audience positioning there. And secondly, Shakespeare suggests that it is not merely the shape of the nose that they share, but its dirtiness also. Leonidas fails to keep his nose clean by delving restlessly into the intricacies of Polynixes and Hermione's relationship, and he is so eager to find betrayal that his nose has become dirtied by his actions. So there is your analysis there. And then we have more audience positioning as well as linking back to your thesis at the end. As such, audiences are positioned to see that the truth of filial relation and evil action can be found within a character's face. Nice. All right, so a couple of tips about essays. Always plan your essays. So important. A lot of students think they can get away with just smashing out an essay, no worries, unbothered, but it often results in clunky writing. It often results in people jumping around with their story, with their essay, and not sticking to a solid line of reasoning. So take all of the time you need, both outside and within an exam room, to write out a full plan. Thesis, topic sentence, your segues, and your evidence before you even put a word on the page. Also, within an exam room, having a plan beside you will help you fend off writer's block and ensures that you're not trying to hold all of the memorized information in your head as you synthesize arguments into sentences. So because you have to memorize all of your evidence for this task, getting all of that evidence down onto the page at the start means you're not taking up valuable brain space trying to hold onto that while you're writing your piece. Number 2, always refer back to how the text audience is being positioned. So it's super important to note not only how the text is sharing a message, but how that message is being interpreted by the audiences that viewed it. This means you need to refer to both traditional and contemporary audiences. You don't need to refer to both in every paragraph, but they should be mentioned within the essay. Both should be mentioned within the essay. And this will also demonstrate how the meaning and interpretation of the text has changed over time. Number 3, don't be afraid to write simple sentences. The golden rule with analytical essays is clarity over complexity. You can use the best and fanciest vocab in the world. You can use long, beautiful, winding sentences. But if the marker doesn't understand what your key argument is or doesn't feel like you're developing your thesis throughout, you're not going to get a good mark. So clarity is the most important. Number 4, if you don't know what to write next, that's okay. Leave a gap. Come back to it later. The last thing you want is to try and push through that panic and write something that doesn't fit or you're not proud of. So instead, leave a gap, come back to it later. That's totally fine. When you're finished writing, edit your work. I know, I understand the compulsion to just hand the exam in and run out of that room and never think about it again, but you don't want to get marked down over silly things like spelling or punctuation. So edit really carefully, read all the way through. If you have time, read through it twice, and try and make the most of your preparation time before you get in the exam room to try and avoid those little details. So for example, if you're studying something like Shakespeare, which often has some very strange names in them, like for example, Polynexes, then take some time to ensure you know how to spell them beforehand, so that's not going to be a problem in the exam room. All right, a couple of really quick tips on taking the external exam. Now, remember, 30 minutes before the exam begins, you've basically done everything that you can to prepare for this piece. The things that you can do in the 30 minutes beforehand are actually not going to really change your final mark. So take that time to breathe, center yourself, ensure you have all the tools that you need, and look forward to being done. In just a few hours' time, you'll be done with that external exam. If you like, you'll never have to do literature again. So definitely be looking forward to that. The morning of, eat breakfast. Even if you're feeling really anxious and nervous about it, it's so important to get some food in your system. It just will give your brain something to be using as fuel to be getting the work done. So make sure you have eaten beforehand. Be really careful about filling out all the details on your exam. Now, I know this seems like quite a simple thing to be mentioning, but again, you don't want to be marked down or not marked at all because you haven't, carefully marked which exam question or essay question you're going to be responding to. So make sure you've done that all nicely. You can even ask an exam moderator to help you help you ensure that everything has been filled out nicely and correctly. All right, as I've mentioned a few times, but I'm going to mention again because it's that important, use all the planning time. Take all of the planning time available to ensure you have a really solid understanding of the shape of your essay that you're going to take. Again, this will just free up your brain space and will help prevent writer's block as you're pulling your essay together within the exam. In a perfect world, your plan should be as detailed as you can make it. So if you can, write out your ideas in sentence form because those sentences can be edited slightly and put directly into the essay itself. But make sure you prioritize what is written out fully on your plan. So your plan should include a thesis, topic sentences, and evidence. At its most basic, that's what your plan needs to have. That's what it needs to have. That's what it needs to include. If you have time, if you're not feeling too panicked or too rushed, you should also try and include notes on audience positioning, cohesion ties, how you're going to be linking things together, and what your broad statement is going to be at the end of your conclusion. Now, as I mentioned before, that formula for your body paragraphs can be a super useful tool in the planning time to kind of make sure that you're linking ideas together nicely. So definitely be using that. All right. If you're overwhelmed and have no idea what to write in the middle of the exam, take a breath, step back a little bit. Don't obviously get up and step back, but lean back, put all of your things down, close your eyes, take a nice deep breath, refocus yourself. It is not going to be lost time by taking the time to calm yourself down. You can leave a gap, move on, and return when you have fresher eyes and a fresher mind. In the real world, long pieces like this are so rarely written within 2.5 hours, and they're more than often not written in the same order that they are read. So professional authors will jump around and write all different sections of it. So it's okay to do that in the exam time. If the gap you've left is too small to what you end up writing, you can write elsewhere on the extra paper at the back, but it needs to be really clearly marked on the page, on the gap, and at that little at the top of the extra bit, at the end of the exam paper, so that the marker knows where to find that. It's really important that's done. All right, go back over all of your work, check it carefully, make sure you have all the details in your working that the question has asked for. Now, this is obviously not explicit. You don't have to round to the correct number of decimal places, but look at your essay question and ensure that you have answered it explicitly. Ensure that you have a title, make sure that you've spelt all of the names correctly, your spelling and grammar is flawless, all of those sorts of things. All right, yes. If you are feeling stuck, if you're feeling panicked and overwhelmed, take a moment to breathe. It's okay. Trying to push through the panic, trying to just keep writing will only allow it to grow and overwhelm you. So it is okay to take the time. It's not going to be lost time if you do so. All right. A few broad study tips about doing well in senior, about acing year 12. So the first thing, try and have 3 achievable goals per day. If you give yourself 12,000 billion tasks to complete within 24 hours, it is going to be completely unrealistic and it is going to be entirely overwhelming. So set yourself goals that you can actually achieve within a day, and being able to tick those off the list quite easily will aid you in feeling good about yourself and get that progression ball rolling. Super good. Have one day of a week that is completely free of study, that you don't even think about school, that you don't think about anything. Obviously, it's going to have to be one of the weekend days, typically, because you're at school the other days of the week. But you need to have some separation from your academic studies to ensure that you have that balance we were talking about right at the start of the session. It is also really important that you set yourselves solid emotional boundaries. Pushing yourself when you are tired and burnt out will not be beneficial. It will only cause your burnout and tiredness to increase later on. And you don't want to be experiencing one of those breakdowns right before your big exams. So it's really important you're being intentional about resting and about balancing your life of school with other social commitments and spending time with your family and all of those good things. It is also really important to take care of your physical health. So healthy bodies are homes to healthy brains. Try and get in the habit of doing a little bit of exercise that you enjoy. It doesn't have to be a lot, it doesn't have to be hectic or crazy, but it's just a good way, again, to be resetting your mind, getting in a good mental space, getting that nice hit of endorphins, which are going to make you feel good about yourself. Go ahead, set yourself goals, small, tiny goals like completing your complex unfamiliar questions, big goals like achieving a certain mark at the end of a semester or at the end of a term, and then actually celebrate them. You want to get yourself into a positive reinforcement loop where you're teaching your brain that working hard and achieving your goals will get you something nice, something that you enjoy. So go ahead and go out with your friends after you achieve something, watch some Netflix, go for a run, hang out with people, whatever makes you feel good, whatever makes you happy. And go ahead and break down those big tasks. When you look at a massive task like your creative multimodal, I don't know why I can't say that word, which has so many moving parts across such a long period of time, it can be so overwhelming. And that's one of the biggest factors that increases procrastination, that makes people feel like they don't want to start something because it's just too overwhelming. Instead, break the task down into more achievable sections. So this could be, first up, I'm just going to write my creative plan. I'm just going to write out what I want to do. Next, I'm going to take that to my teacher, see what they think. Great. Now I'm just going to write my opening paragraph. Close my computer, move on to something else, think about something else, and then come back to it. You'll actually end up completing the task a lot faster if you do it like that, and it'll be completed a lot earlier, so it won't be such a rush before the deadline if you do it that way. All right. This brings us to the end of our session today. I wanted to thank you again so much for joining me. It has been so fun to go through literature 3 and 4 with you guys. It's such a fun year with such a fun set of assessments. There's quite a broad range there for you to be demonstrating all of your literature skills throughout the year. It is my hope for you guys that you get to enjoy it. You get to push yourself and be creative and think outside the box and write work that you are prouder of than any of the other work you've written before. I am so incredibly rooting for you all. Year 12 and senior can be such a hectic time. It can be so overwhelming, but I hope you can make the most out of it and enjoy every moment that you have. If you are interested in spending some more time with us at ATAR Notes, we would so love to see you there. There are so many incredible resources that we have to offer you guys to make the most out of school and to be really smashing all your academic goals. So please go ahead and check out atarnotes.com to be really making the most of this next year and final year of school for you guys. For those that I won't see there, I wish you all the very best. And I want to remind you guys that you're not ever defined by the pesky number that you were assigned at the end of year 12. That is just a number, and it will fade very quickly with time. So continue to push yourself, challenge yourself, have fun, look after yourself, and I hope to see you all very soon. Thank you again, you guys. I believe the moderator in the live Q&A will still be around for a few minutes more after this session concludes. So make sure you ask any last minute questions or concerns down there for them. There's no such thing as a silly question, and I hope that you get all of the answers that you guys need down there. Thank you again. I wish you all the best. Enjoy the rest of your holidays, and I hope you have a wonderful year 12.